Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's nice to see you all again. I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July holiday and that you had a chance to celebrate with your friends, with your family, and most importantly, I hope you had a chance to sample some of the cocktails I've been featuring and also some of the wines. In today's segment, you can see by the color in the glass, we're going to be featuring a white wine. And one, I'm going to tell you right up front, we are talking about my favorite white grape today, and that is Chardonnay. So let me tell you a little bit about what made Chardonnay a prominent grape here in the United States. Back in 1973, there was a contest held in Paris, France. It was called the Jugement de Paris, and in English, the Judgment of Paris. And what happened is the American winemakers from California got together with some French winemakers, and they decided to have this impromptu wine contest. And California vintners took their wines to Paris. They went through a blind taste testing with different wines, Chardonnay being one of those grapes. And to make a long story short, after the blind taste testing done exclusively by French judges, the Americans thought they were going to get clobbered. The Chardonnay, one of the Chardonnays from California, placed first against all the other Chardonnays that were in the contest. And we're talking about $300-400 bottles of white Burgundy that were entered into the contest as well. And this was in a blind taste test. The name of that winery was Chateau Montelena, and they are still producing wine today in the Napa Valley. So Chardonnay opened up at that time. That was a shock around the wine world, and lo and behold, Chardonnay exploded in this country and around the globe. It is probably the most popular white wine in terms of consumption and also in terms of excuse me, I need a little throat cleanser here. And it's also very popular in terms of the amount of plantings that occur around the planet. So what I'd like to do as we talk about Chardonnay today, and I apologize for the crowded table here, but you'll understand why in a minute. I want to talk about the styles and flavor profiles, obviously, as we always do with a wine grape. I want to talk about the regions and the climatic influence of on the Chardonnay grape, because that's very important as we go through and sample these different wines. I want to talk about the winemaker influence on the wine, which is crucial because Chardonnay is one of those wines that really holds the stamp of the winemaker. I want to talk about the serving temperature and smaller things like that, food pairings, and also I have 4 wines that I want to walk you through, all of which, believe it or not, are somewhat available to you in the United States. So let's begin with the flavor profiles and styles. Chardonnay has so many different descriptors that go with it, as I said, because of the different regions and the different climates of those regions. It's like a double influence on the grape. So you'll find Chardonnays having apple flavor, citrus, lemon, sometimes lime, but mostly lemon, tropical fruit, pineapple, melon, stone fruit, peach, apricot, vanilla, spice, nutmeg, and butter. So you say, well, Doc G, how can that happen? Well, that has to do with the winemaker's influence and the climate that the wine, where the grape is produced. So you can see one Chardonnay, and that's going to stand true for these 4. They could be all different wines, but they are all from the Chardonnay grape. But they all have been influenced differently by the winemaker. So how does the region and the climate influence? These are so good. My favorite grape. How does that influence take place? Well, first of all, let's talk about the regions. The king of grapes, or the king of white grapes, was probably born in Burgundy, just like Pinot Noir was. And then it made its way around the world from Burgundy. And we're talking over a millennia ago. It's also obviously now prominent in California. It's next to Cabernet Sauvignon, the number one produced grape of all colors, red or white, in California. It's grown in Australia. It's grown in the Finger Lakes. It's grown in Virginia. It's grown here in Pennsylvania. I'm just going to say it now because I don't have them on the table. Stony Run Winery, Maple Springs Winery, and Manatawny Creek Winery, all within 30 minutes of me here, make a great Chardonnay. So Chardonnay is a very prolific grape in terms of where it appears and how it's grown. So the second thing that goes hand in hand with the region is the climate. And basically you can divide it into two major subgroups: cool climate and warm climate. Cool climate Chardonnays, this is a Finger Lake Chardonnay, which I'll talk about later. Obviously a cool climate. This is a Sonoma County Chardonnay, a little bit warmer climate. This Kendall Jackson is from this is a blend of different appellations in California. So you can consider it a warm climate. And this last one, I have to have a Burgundy here, is from the Mâconnais, the Mâcon region in Burgundy. And that tends to be a cooler climate. And those wines, so based on the cool climate, you're going to get more acid, a little crisper, a little bit more citrus, mineral. It's going to be lighter bodied. Now, I'll say something in the glass. Chardonnays don't really hit you that much in the nose unless there's a lot of oak on it, or unless they've done a lot of aging on the lees, which I'll talk about in a minute. This one has a lot of oak on it, and you can smell the vanilla in the glass. So when the wine comes from a warmer region like California, if you like a lot of red wine, they say red wine drinkers really, the only white wine they tend to like is Chardonnay because it can be very big like a red wine. But the warmer climate Chardonnays are tend to be less acidic. They have fuller fruit, more tropical fruit, mango, pineapple, papaya, believe it or not. They're fuller bodied, and they can approach 14%, which is very rare. See this one, you can really taste the oak, which is very rare for a white wine. You don't really see them. I'm not rare, but you do not see that as often. So how does the winemaker influence Chardonnay? You're wondering, as I said. Well, Chardonnay is considered kind of a blank slate wine in that Chardonnay alone, if it's not really done well, can be kind of flabby. Flabby is a wine term for it doesn't do much for you. It won't have much of a nose. It won't have much of a flavor. But Chardonnay, done properly, and if you haven't had a good one yet, when you do, you're going to change your mind about Chardonnay if you're not a Chardonnay drinker. Trust me. Back here on my wine shelf here are 3 rows of Chardonnay. I love this wine. So, first of all, the influences that you can put on Chardonnay include the following. No oak. They don't put them in a barrel. They put them in a steel tank, and that is called, it's called no oak. What I meant to say is there are winemakers who do both. One of these here is a no oak. I know this wine. I've met this winery. I've been to this winery a number of times in the Finger Lakes. It's unoaked. It says it on the label. He does not influence it with oak. Chablis wine from the Chablis region in France is a very good Chardonnay. So when you see the word Chablis, you're drinking a Chardonnay, and it will be bone dry. It will be crisp. It will be a wonderful pairing for many, many foods. So if you see a Chablis, they're not cheap. A good Chablis will run you you'll get in at 20, and then it goes up from there. You can also get wines that are no oak and aged on their lees, like this one, and I'll talk about that when I get to it. Aged on the lees means it's on the dead yeast, as I talked about when we did the Chardonnay, when we did the Champagne clip. I talked about how the lees influences the taste, gives it that yeasty flavor. Chardonnay has a yeasty flavor because Chardonnay's in Champagne. You can also do partial oak. The winemaker might crush the grapes, put it in a steel tank for a while, and then put it in partial oak. You can do full oak fermentation, which really kicks up the flavor profile, brings out some of that spice and nutmeg and stuff that I talked about earlier. And then finally, Chardonnay is the only white wine that goes through what's called malolactic fermentation, which is what all red wines do. And malolactic fermentation is when you change the malic acid in wine, which is like apples, and from mallow, malum from Latin, and it changes it to lactic acid during the malolactic fermentation. And lactic acid is lactose. So what it does is it gives the wine a fuller mouthfeel. And if you've had a big Chardonnay, it's going to have that. It almost tastes like milk. My wife, she does not like full-bodied Chardonnays. Consequently, or also, she does not really care for a glass of milk. So it's a mouthfeel issue. And if you have that, you don't like that tactile sensation, you're not going to like a big, full, mellow Chardonnay. And then also, one of the influences that the winemaker can do is take Chardonnay and make champagne with it, as we've talked about before. So I'm not going to spend any more time, but pure Chardonnay champagne is called Blanc de Blanc, if you remember. White wine, white from white, basically. So that is kind of what the winemaker can do to influence this wine. Really, like Chardonnay is just one of those wines that can just really have a multitude of styles, shapes, nuances, and flavors. So when you go to get your Chardonnay, after we talk about this today, I want you to be well equipped to understand what you might be getting when you take a look at the bottle and when you examine it, if you do any research on it before you happen to buy it. I can tell you, there are a lot of really, really good Chardonnays at the right price point. I'm going to tell you this too. There are a lot of bad ones. So it would help you to know what you're getting before you get it, so you don't waste your hard-earned money on a bottle that just is not going to cut it for you. I'm going to give you a recommendation point blank. Don't spend less than $12 for a bottle of Chardonnay. You'll be sorry. You might as well have bought something else. So, with that said, the serving temperature, well, let me talk about, before we get to that, let's talk about food pairings, because I want to introduce to you today one of my favorite books that I have in my wine library. And that is a book called What to Drink with What to Eat. And this is what I call my food and wine pairing Bible. It is so beat up. The cover here is torn. I keep it in my kitchen. I like to use it when I have a glass of wine almost every night with my meal. I really love to have wine to complement my food, and this book helps me do that. And because Chardonnay pairs with so many things, rather than try to just miss a few, I have it ready here. If you turn to the Chardonnay page, and this book is divided into two segments. The first segment of the book lists all these different foods from A to Z, and it tells you what wine to have with it. The second half of the book has most of your major wines and some wines that you might not really know about from A to Z, and it tells you what food to pair with it. So it's a great resource. So I'm just going to read to you in general some of the great things that you can pair with Chardonnay. Some of the same things that paired well with champagne. Anything with butter and butter sauce go really well. Lobster. Lobster with big Chardonnays is like a cliche. Chicken, scallops, whitefish, shrimp, swordfish, veal, even veal, a meat that can go, because Chardonnay can stand up to it. And any way that you want to, pork is fantastic with Chardonnay. Salmon with dill and dill salmon, Chardonnay, oh my God, fantastic meal. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to have salmon for dinner tonight, and I think I'm going to pair one of these Chardonnays with it. So that's a little bit about food pairing with Chardonnay. Now this book doesn't only do Chardonnay, it has every grape you can probably think of that you might be able to find. So now, you notice here there's a lot of space taken up with my friends here on the table. My recommendation is that you have a very large glass to swirl it around, release the aromas. Really not much coming off of that, a little citrus. This is the unoaked Chardonnay, so you're really not going to get a lot on it. But when it hits your palate, it's going to turn into something fantastic. So again, remember, a nice big open glass if you can. If you can't, just don't drink it out of the bottle. So let me start then with my recommendations for tonight. The first one that I'm going to recommend for you is a wine called an unoaked Chardonnay 2018 from a vineyard in the Finger Lakes on Keuka Lake, if you're familiar with the Finger Lakes, called Domaine Le Sueur. And it is a French family that came here to make wine. And there are generations of winemakers. They decided to come to the Finger Lakes. They did their research and they found out that the terroir, the soil, the climate were very well suited to what they wanted to do. And I have personally met the winemaker. His name is Sebastien. And this wine, he informs us, is aged on its lees. So this is unoaked, but when you have an unoaked Chardonnay, it can tend to be a little flabby. But if it's aged on its lees, they say in French, âgé sur lie. And if it's aged that way, it will impart a nice yeasty profile to the wine and give it a little bit of body, almost fooling you to think maybe that's oak, but it's yeast. So let's take a sip of this and see. Even a little lemon. There's even a little tropical note on this. But you don't get there's no vanilla because that oak isn't there. Oak is what pulls out that vanilla, because vanillin, the compound, is what is in oak, and that's what imparts. Grapes don't naturally have vanilla in them. So you've got to get that flavor from somewhere. So that's Domaine Le Sueur. Unfortunately, you will not find this in PA. You're going to have to take a trip to the Finger Lakes, which I highly recommend. Go to Keuka Lake and look for Domaine Le Sueur unoaked Chardonnay, about $18 a bottle. Our second feature of the night is a winery that I visited. I told you about this. My wife and we went to visit the Pedroncelli family in 2009. We found this wine at an anniversary dinner back in the 90s. We loved it. We couldn't find it for a while, and then we found it. And then when we found it, we couldn't stop getting it, and with good reason. Now this is a Sonoma County Chardonnay. A little bit more on the nose. You can tell the minute you smell this one that it has been in oak. It doesn't seem like it's been in oak very long, but it definitely has a spicy smell on the nose. Wow. It's like a baking spice, a little bit of that nutmeg that I was talking about earlier. And then the little bit of the tropical fruit. Very, very smooth. Fantastic wine. You can get this wine on WTSO. They offer it up sometimes. I happen to be a member of Pedroncelli's Wine Club. They ship to PA. You can sometimes find it at some Total Wines around the country. So it's a little bit harder for you to find. But it is a wonderful wine. Our next wine, and this one surprised me, is called Kendall Jackson 2019 Vinters Reserve Chardonnay. And in my research for this little talk, I found out that this Kendall Jackson is the #1 selling Chardonnay for the last 26 years in the United States. That's fairly impressive. I tell you what, Doc G has never had a bottle of this. So I had to go out and get one to see if I was going to like it. So here's my premiere for you tonight as to whether or not this is a wine I would drink. Nice. Definitely oak on it. You can smell it. It's just, you can smell wood. It's not off-putting. Much fuller mouthfeel. Much smoother. Less acidic. Spice. A little bit of apricot, maybe a little bit of pineapple. I think I'm going to buy more of this. And finally, I want to finish with a Burgundian. And this one is from Macon Village. And just a little backstory on this one. I found this one originally at Moore Brothers. And Moore Brothers has 2 wine shops. One in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and one in Wilmington, Delaware. I'd go to Wilmington. It's tax-free if you're so inclined. But I also, when I went to France 2 years ago, was able to visit the winery, Andre Bonhomme. And I was able to visit with the winemaker, and it was just like an experience of a lifetime to be able to go to France, the source where this wine was actually grown. Now this wine's profile is totally different. Very, very little on the nose. But I can tell you this might be my favorite wine. This one right here. Crisp, smooth, beautiful palate, wonderful finish, a little bit of acid, a little bit of mineral undertone, a little bit on the nose as it opens up, a little bit of apple, kind of like green apple tart. Fantastic wine. So, my friends, I know this one ran a little long, but Chardonnay, as the king of grapes, deserved that time. So my advice to you is, if you want to start, go find one that's unoaked. Kendall Jackson here is available all over PA. And it also makes an unoaked one. If you want to run an experiment just like I did tonight, go buy one of their unoaked wines and one of these. And then you can do your own taste testing. And you can share the results for the rest of us to see. So until our next segment, I wish you well, bonne santé, and we'll see you again soon.